guys? What's up, flies? I thought I'd go live. It's poetry weekend here in New York City, so I thought I'd just go live and do a little preview of what's to come, some of the offerings we're gonna have for sale at the festival this weekend. So I printed out Wednesday, all day Wednesday, basically. I printed, folded, and stapled these books. I think I printed out. There's not that many. There's not even 40 of them. But so these are all different titles. I've published a number. I don't even know how many actually. Probably 20 or something chapbooks over the since about. I started actually printing books in like 2017. I think that's when I actually put together stuff. Before that, I think I looked on self-publishing as like lame. Something you're not supposed to do, not legitimate. Uh, it took many years to get to the point where you thought that was like even an option, actually. Or, I don't know, just like, also, I think my writing style and the thing that I wanted to do changed a little bit to the point that I felt good about publishing what I've published. My writing before, 2017, I'd say, was different. It was more traditional, where I was like trying to write these individual poems that you send off to literary journals or whatever. You get a collection. 2017 is when I started to do kind of chronological serial poems, calendar poems that were all sort of connected. Even though I started doing my TV show in 2014, which is basically the same thing as my chapbooks in a lot of ways, it took me a few years to get there as a writer or as a poet to be like, okay, I can just publish 20 serial chapbooks that are sort of like my thoughts, little episodes of my life. And it's pretty interesting to go through them. I've recovered some of the ones from before the pandemic, which were on Sarah's computer that got lost. I had them on a Google Drive or in my Gmail or something, so I was able to recover a lot of these, and now I can actively print them. So generally, what I do, this is just these is just pieces of letter paper. That's all it is. This is standard printer paper. I fold it over and I staple it. And it makes a nice little book. Each one is about 8 pages or so. I'd say they average 8 pieces of paper. So there's 4 pages per sheet. That means I've got a 32-page book. That's nicely bound. You pick this up at a reading. This can go on a shelf with all your other chapbooks. I mean, it's proletariat. It's no frills. But that's also what I like about it. It's a political, economic statement. You're repurposing office supplies. Like when I initially started doing that, I got printer paper from, I remember going with Sarah to her office once. And before the festival, before the New York Poetry Festival, we Xeroxed all this stuff. And I printed out all these books and stuff. So, taking from your job and taking staples, taking printer paper, printing shit out at work. Highly recommended. I mean, these are basically zines. A lot of them I do add nice artwork. Like this one is probably the best artwork-wise. I'm just kind of lazy, so I don't do it to all of them. It would be easy to add covers to all of these. That looks pretty nice. Considering, the unit cost of this is about 20 cents. It's 8, this one is 40 pages, so it's 10 sheets of paper. It's like a book, basically. Ink and 2 staples. So however much 10 sheets of paper cost, the ink was $10 for the whole drum. So the unit cost is very low. It's just it's labor intensive. It took me the whole day to make 36 of these things. which is not that many, but it's a very immediate, any reading I go to, I take a manila envelope with 4 of these things, and it's suggested donation of $5. So already there, every one you sell, you're basically making $5. One of these sells for practically the entire print run. And it's a nice little book. You get it at the reading, you take it, you can read it on the train home. I try to make it easy to read. And it's a serial thing, so every book connects to the next book. So theoretically, it's like a comic book, If you got into it, you would want to read the whole series, but they're hard to collect. Even I don't have copies of all of them, really, at this point. There's a couple books I made, Procrastination Innings. That's probably one of the best books I put together. And Bicycle Day. I took those to Europe. I don't know if I even have copies of the original documents. Procrastination Innings. Those were full page books. I didn't fold it over, I just stapled it, so they were this size, which I don't really do. I like having pocket size. That's the one drawback of this, is that it doesn't fit in your pocket. But it's still a good book size. It's got a nice page. You can get a pretty good font size. So anyway, I wanted to go through one by one and just sort of talk about... I know nobody gives a fuck, but... It's a whole series of books, and, they each are of a time and place, and we're kind of a specific artistic thing, or they each have, kind of an aesthetic, or, a concept, or something that's unique about them, stylistically. And I think archiving this kind of stuff is good, the entire run. So, like I said, I don't have every book. The first book like this I can remember making was this book called Drop City, which I made in Ridgewood, because the library at Ridgewood, Queens, the Bernadette Mayer Queens Library, I say that because it's across the street from Bernadette Mayer's childhood home. Of course, they don't acknowledge that, but they should. Anyway, you could print 20 pages a day for free. So I could print basically 2 chapbooks a day. So I'd go every day. And they had this option where you could print a booklet, which, to be honest, these are all pages on a Word doc. These aren't like a different margin setting or anything. They're regular size letter, business office pages. It's just, with the booklet setting, it automatically prints it in this kind of fold over, which is it's a really nice... They look a lot like Taylor Mead's books, actually. Taylor Mead had his Anonymous Diaries of a New York Youth were a series of pamphlets like this, really. They looked a lot like this. I've never seen one in person, but I've seen pictures and things. He would sell them on the McDougal or at the Subway or whatever. And so it's a similar idea to that. It's just like an immediate samizdat. It's a citizen pamphlet like Tom Paine. It's a penny sheet. I can just hand it to somebody and they go, "What's this?" And then they read it on the train home, and it changes their life. Changes their consciousness forever. Changes the whole consciousness of the whole human race forever. Just from Washington Square Park. So anyway, okay. So this is the first one that I have sort of chronologically. There's a few I didn't reprint. I didn't reprint in the Drop City. I just couldn't find the doc. So I don't actually have a complete run. I like to have a complete run every time I do a major event like this, because I think for the real collectors, maybe somebody out there would be interested. Yeah, I'll buy every chapbook for $50 or whatever and get all of them and read them all start to finish. I try to make my writing fun, and easy while being smart and kind of having a narrative that you have to like figure out and put together on your own. It's a show don't tell thing, but like I try to make it so you want to read more. I try to make it a page turner. And I don't know, it's hard to tell objectively if other people are having that experience or um but this is something I was talking to this German guy at the reading last night. I did this open mic in Long Island City at the hostel. And we were just talking about the difference between Europe and America. And I'm just trying to figure out why America is so prejudiced against it. Like people just they want lives of hard work and pain and no health insurance and this and that. And I think a part of it is like Americans, like European culture. I was asking about stand up comedy. They have stand up comedy there. And he's like, not really. Like, he said a lot of their culture they get from America, actually. They watch American shows, they watch The Simpsons, all that kind of shit. But they're also kind of smart and kind of adults. I think in America you do have to dumb stuff down completely. Like there is no adult film industry in this country, meaning movies for adults. Really, there's no Paul Mazursky movies out there. Anything that's mature and intelligent, you have to smash into stupidity and lowbrow, like Steve Martin or something, or Will Ferrell was like the comedy fucking he dominated comedy in the 2000s. And it's like they kind of have a dumb character that they do. I think that's America. You have to have lowbrow and highbrow simultaneously. Especially at this point. Somebody said the Marvel movies were cultural genocide. I kind of agree. But I do think that my work tries to live in a place of maturity and adulthood, even though, like I'm saying, I do have kind of a kid aspect or a cartoonish aspect, a comedic, a clownish aspect that's like accessible. I try to make things accessible, but I also try not to dumb it down too goddamn much. I try to simplify it. That's what I would say. With my writing, with my poetry in particular, I think there is an emphasis on trying to simplify. I try to use simple words for the most part. Anytime I use a multisyllabic, kind of highbrow word, it's usually for a reason. It's usually because I find it like some kind of like souvenir that has value or something. Just something I've collected. Even the poems are collections. They're just collections of lines, collections of the best things that occurred to you or whatever. So I'm really just trying to streamline my life story to the most interesting, smartest shit, the funniest shit, but also keep it simple. Like haiku, you're counting syllables. There's an economy of syllables, of words. You try to use as few words as possible, as few syllables as possible. You're conscientious of every single sound. No syllable is unconsidered or throwaway. If you have something that's a little weak, you cut it. I guess that my secret agenda is to try to like implant some kind of highbrow culture into this country again. Sort of that. I think the Beats were able to do that actually. Even they used stuff that was sort of lowbrow, or they talk about comedians, or the way they distributed the City Lights Pocket Poets and stuff is very, Charlie Chaplin being like sort of an figure for a lot of these, being poor, being an every person type figure, being an immigrant, sympathy with the poor, sympathy with the masses, the adventure of being a tramp, and the imagination of having nothing. that's not really the world we glamorize and live in. Everybody wants stuff. Everybody wants a nice bourgeois kind of thing. But if you look at Taylor Mead, if you look at the Beats, if you look at Jerry Lewis, that's the other thing I wanted to talk about. I know I'm getting way off topic. The Jerry Lewis telethon. I don't know if I can talk about it in this broadcast, but I've been fascinated with it recently. I think it's like this magnum opus. It's a total artwork. It's an epic 22-hour theater piece every year, Labor Day weekend for the entire country. And I want to believe that he did a lot of good. I don't want to believe that it was some kind of rip-off where he was actually like taking a bunch of money from the charity. I want to believe he did it for, and I think he did. I think he did it just to help. But I'll get into that later. But the Jerry Lewis telethon is something I've been obsessed with. It's because it's Labor Day. It's Labor Day week. So anyway, and it's New York Poetry Festival weekend, September 11th on Sunday. So there's a lot going on. I got my featured set on Monday. I'm working tonight. No one is watching as usual. I'm talking to myself, but it's for posterity. It's for the greater good. It's for God. I do it for God. It's between me and God. So anyway, the first chat book I have here, it's not necessarily the first one I wrote, I don't think. Or it's not the first one I typed up necessarily. I'm not sure. But this is one of my best books, I actually think. It's called 1 Year. And I actually have never distributed it because I wanted to put it out as a calendar because, okay, the concept behind this book, I started writing it September 29th, 2017. And we were having a workshop at my house in Park Slope in the basement with Brad Mann and Olivia. I think Zoe was there, maybe John Luries, maybe Daniel Grzyonko. Olivia and Zoe got into a fight, I remember. There was some tension there. Maybe Lucas Trombley was there, I'm not sure. But anyway, it was in a basement of the Slooge when it was still carpeted and all that, Christmas lights. And anyway, Brad Mann had this idea about writing a line per day or something. He said he tried to write one line per day. And I thought, oh, that'd be a great book. Write one line per day for a year and then put that out as like a long poem. So I think this book is 40 pages, but it's very easy to read. And that's exactly what it is. It's one line per day for an entire year, day by day. September 29th, Speed Orgy, where Brad Mann gave me Speed Orgy and the idea for this poem. September 30th, drinking yesterday's kombucha, it's whatever's in my face. October 1st, table moved a circle to the middle of the triangle. October 2nd, why not living? And so it goes on and on and on until September 28th. The hard but sufferable loss which levels downward the voice so as to deepen the basin for singing. September 29th. 1 year ago, said about finding the boundaries of vocabulary. Apocalypse might just complicate things. So it's literally 1 year, day by day. And it's kind of fascinating because, to be honest, a lot of things did happen this year. This was the first time I did acid. This was when I got with Sarah. That was just, I think the first time I did acid was September 13th or somewhere around there. And then, so I started writing this September 29th. The acid may have had something to do with it. It does kind of, it's not just the trip. It clarifies your mind for like weeks afterwards. Where it's just like things, energy comes to you, you know, you have weird coincidences. You're just like thinking on a deeper, clearer level for a few weeks after you do it. But you see my writing style change through this book. You see, at the beginning of this, some of these lines, I have this book, it's sort of my political book, it's called October. And so it was another journal piece. This was when I was in the Bernadette Mayer reading group. And so I was reading Alice Notley and all these kind of like journal type things, memory, of course. And so I was thinking about it in this calendar. If you watch, there's an episode of my show called Memory Zine, which is readings from, or there's an October episode, which is me reading the October book. And so it's these long kind of diary pieces where the point is to just like publish the whole diary. And I'd started playing with that earlier in the year. I had this piece called Ohio Diary, which is in my myself included selected poems, which is sort of like the old poems. Those were poems that were like regular poems. They're not attached to the calendar. They're not attached to my life like all of this stuff is. So all of this stuff, including the 1 year book, if you read all of it, if you watch the TV show, if you read 1 year, if you read October, if you watch those episodes, you can kind of put together what was going on. It tells, it's an autofiction of my inner life and what I saw and experienced at the time. So it's got a slow, it's almost like a time lapse. Over the year, you see the sentence structures change. And to be honest, working at that level, where it's just like one line per day, what's the line I'm going to choose? It causes you to really hone in on every syllable. And so you really study like what a line is. There's no line breaks. My goal was to make it one line and like, which is ironic because I wrote it in this tiny little book, so I had to have line breaks. But my goal was to make it a poem where every line was just one line with no line breaks. It just like started and went to the margin. And so the whole poem was like one line, one line, one line, you know, very stacked. The book, unfortunately, there's a few of them that are a little bit long, so there's some like spillover. It's not a, it's part of the, that's part of the, you know, you see it changing. As the year goes on, I start to write longer. I start to fit more in the line. You can kind of see what I'm reading. That's when I first started reading like Charles Bernstein. You can see Anselm Berrigan stuff. Steve Carey, I was reading. But then later, it's like, that's when I moved in with Sarah. Halfway through this book is when I move in with Sarah. So my whole life changed. I went from living in the Sludge in that tiny room to living with Sarah and Moondog and roommates and Greenpoint. I started volunteering at the Poetry Project 2018. We traveled. That's when, so this book connects with the October book. There's lines from this book that are in the October book. That line about table moved a circle to the middle of the triangle is in the October book. So you can see it's literally connected. I think that's kind of fun to use the same line in different works, but it's also connected to this book, which was written in summer of 2018. So this book occurred toward the end of this book. This book went from autumn 2017 to autumn 2018. And it is kind of like seeing my writing go out of the old style. I had this piece that I read, that reading I did at Secret Loft in 2017 was pretty wild. And I had this piece called Thoughts of the Day. I was totally influenced by Train Ride and Back in Boston Again and all the Joe Brainerd journals, all those Joe Brainerd travel journals, Bolinas Journal. And he has all these diaries, you know, that like have dates and stuff in them. But they're long poems in a lot of ways. I remember. This is sort of like an I remember, almost. In that it's one-liners, you know, long lines. And it's like a system. It's like a system poem. It's sort of like a John Cage. I heard that there was this, part of the inspiration for this was there was this John Cage piece where it was like, it could only be performed at like this church in France or some goddamn place, some abbey or something that had a bell, there's certain bells. And the idea was you rang the bells in a certain order, but you only rang them like once every, like, I forget, once a year or once every 50 years. So anyway, the piece, it was a piece of music, but it took like 200 years to perform because you only played one note every like 6 months or something. And so I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, you know, like the song is 200 years long, literally. It's not 2 minutes. It's not 6 minutes, not 23 minutes. It's 200 years long. I thought, wow, that's a whole other kind of scale. Like, especially in poetry, you know, you're used to working small, like I said, trying to compress. But that's why I said I wanted to put this out as a calendar. So it's like every line would be like a page on the calendar. And so you'd tear it off and then you get the next line. So the idea would be the poem would take an entire year to read or experience. But I also like part of the fun of having the calendar pieces is it does feel like life. It gives you the sensation of life where it's like, but in a kind of succinct container where it's like you can read this poem in half an hour or something. But it really does feel like you've been through all these months, you know, the weather's in it, the sunlight, the seasons, the growth of people, you know, characters come into it, all this. So it's like it's got this kind of cumulative effect. And I think that's part of my work in general, the TV show and all of these chapbooks. So I'm talking about these are the chapbooks I printed out for New York Poetry Festival this weekend. And it's a series, a chronological, it's sort of like a Dwanell cycle, but in microscope. It's really zooming in on the timeline. But I also, you're playing with time in interesting ways. So this is a whole year, day by day. You get every single day in it, but it's an entire year in a book, whereas Taking It to the Streets is a political poem that's really like it. I think all of the poems in this I wrote in one night practically. Or it's really from like a few weeks. But it's like, so this is September, October 2019. First, before that, I want to talk about, so this book connects to the 1 year book. Because I started to write this. This is part of my relationship trilogy, which will be on sale. It's unfortunate that all my Perfect Bound books are like about my fucking relationship, but there we are. And it is a trilogy. It's like Before Sunrise, except it tells, this is like the honeymoon. This is like, you know, the second book of the Inferno or whatever, the trilogy, the Divine Comedy. So this is Paris. This is like we're in a marriage at this point. And then this is the divorce book, LA Story. And I reread this the other day, and I got to say this book is really, it really will rip your heart out. I think it works. I think it works emotionally and narratively. So anyway, you can. The idea is these are going to be $5 a piece at the festival this weekend. $5 for these, and then the Perfect Bound books will be $10 a piece. And so you can just read the relationship trilogy, and that will be, you know, it's sort of like the Cormac McCarthy, the Plains trilogy or whatever that book is with Cities of the Plains and, you know, it's similar. So this is Spokane, Washington and San Francisco and Bay Area. So I wrote this summer 2018. We go from Spokane, Washington. I'd never been to that part of the country. And we stayed in this beautiful RV in the back of Sarah's mom's property. Her grandma lived there. She was 90, drinking cans of beer every day, doing handstands. They have a farm. So we were staying on this farm. So it's like, you know, even though we're living in New York, it was kind of this artistic residency, and the book is about the West. So the book is called Alice in the Cities, and it's 2 journals. It's Placid Western, which is Spokane, Washington, Portland, and the Oregon coast, as well as the Willamette River Valley, and then also Left Coast, which is about San Francisco and Big Sur. So it's 2 journals. There's airplane poems in here. And I'm reading Philip Whalen. You can see that. Dorothy Wordsworth Grasmere journals. You know, I was trying to write kind of a pastoral. Everywhere I travel, and specifically during my relationship, I don't know why, but I just got into these sort of like, I guess it's a New York school thing that pronounces this idea that like wherever you are kind of affects your poetics and your writing style. And there are communities of poets in all of these different places. So part of what I was doing on these trips, I mean, especially with San Francisco, right? It's like there's such a rich poetry history. It's comparable to New York, actually, I would say, in its influence, particularly since the 50s or so. So going there and you really can see why those poets write the way they do. It just, and so it opens up you stylistically in a certain way. Some places more than others, but like in the Pacific Northwest, right? Like Ron Lowenson lived up there. Powell's Books. So going in the bookstores in the different places, going to bookstores in San Francisco, going to Green Apple Books, going to Treehorn Books or whatever that bookstore was in Santa Rosa. Santa Rosa's where Black Sparrow was. So they have, it's where fucking David Bromwich lived. So there's all these really serious poets that live in the Bay Area, all the language people, like all Rex Roth, Robert Duncan, you know, James Broughton. There's all these poets that like you might not necessarily know. They're not as up front in New York or other parts of the country, but you go to San Francisco, you go to the bookstores, they have more of their stuffs there. They have City Lights Remainder books. They have Diane DePrima books. They have Bob Kaufman books. They have a lot of New Direction stuff because New Direction published Ferlinghetti and Michael McClure and stuff. And being in those places, you get into like, okay, Michael McClure's got all these pieces about like Loba and Point Doom, or is it Point Loba, which is a place on the way to like Carmel and Monterey and shit. Big Sur, right? Henry Miller Library. And so, you know, when I started dating my ex, I was really obsessed and like primarily kind of like saturated in like New York school writers. Ron Padgett and, you know, everybody I mentioned before, Ted Greenwald, Bernadette Mayer, Louis Warsh. But then going to the West Coast, it was like, oh, okay, Philip Whalen, Dave Meltzer, fucking, you know, Jack Hirschman. And so when this book, you start to see, like, the first half, when I'm in the Pacific Northwest, I'm writing these kind of like, they're sort of romantic poems. They're lines that are stacked on top of each other. But then, once we go to Big Sur in California, the poems become these sort of clouds. You know, that's like a landscape thing. That's being influenced by the big sky out there, the bay, the bridges, Bolinas. Just there's an openness out there that's, you see it on the page. And there's more of an Eastern influence, right? The Eastern influence hits differently in San Francisco. The light is different, the quality of light, those big kind of sloping hills down to the Pacific Ocean, and just the like the infiniteness and kind of like, I mean, the overboatingness. The Pacific Ocean just has this whole other like eternal kind of awesome sublime quality, the overwhelming power of nature. Like the Pacific Ocean really just feels like, whoa. It's powerful and it's meditative and it goes on. The Atlantic Ocean has a different feel. It feels kind of dirtier, colder, silvery. It's not as hard to get across. You know, when you get up to Canada and Greenland, it's kind of not that far over to Ireland and England and shit. And just the nature, you know, the way the city weaves in with nature is so different. New York, you're really not in nature at all. You're like in this little container. You're like in a soda can. Whereas in San Francisco, there's sort of, excuse me, there's sort of like this gradient, this grade, this kind of transitional space between the coast, the ocean, the bay. Portland's kind of a similar vibe. The nature kind of weaves into the city more. And so that did influence my poetry, right? Going out west. I mean, I'd been out west before. I'd never been to the Pacific Northwest. I'd been to Big Sur, but that was the first time I'd really been able to dig in. And I suddenly had a program, going to open mics, going to readings. Having a car helps a lot. You know, anytime I went out there before, I was either on a business trip, I didn't have a car, or I was at the mercy of somebody else's kind of driving me around or whatever. I'd have to walk everywhere. So getting to open mics, getting to readings, getting to this or that. But I got more into the locality, the poets who lived there. I think going to these cities, that's one of the most important things you can do. Do open mics, get into the bookstores, see what they have that's unique to that place. See who the local authors are, see who the local presses are, see if there's anything interesting going on stylistically. You know, a lot of times it's because there's a university there or just the landscape. Like a university can attract some kind of big writer that might kind of put something interesting into the stream of what people are doing. And then if people are self-publishing, you'll find those books in the local bookstores. I don't know. Little magazine, you know, or this is another American thing, but we're so obsessed with success and big culture, big corporations, big media, popular culture, that we just think that any kind of like small thing just doesn't matter at all. Whereas like there really is this strong culture of little magazines, small presses, self-publishing out there. There are people doing interesting things all over the country. And I think open mics are the community theater. They're the state theater of this country. They're the real spirit of the artistic folk tradition in this country, are open mics and these small presses and stuff. They're comparable. Running an open mic is almost like having a magazine. So these were my first foray into printing perfect round books, you know. These were 35 millimeter disposable camera pictures that we had taken that I imported to Lulu and their online book creator, and I was amazed. I was able to put, this is 90 pages, I think. And once again, it's just an extended version of the pamphlets, but it's a little bit more of a substantial read. It's a deeper investigation into the place. The books are almost like New York pieces, and the chat books are almost like New York pieces. You know, like I'm looking at my perfect bound books, I'm like, I don't have a New York book. I've got a Columbus book, I've got a Paris book, I've got an LA book, I've got a San Francisco book. I don't have a New York book. Well, it's like my pamphlets are kind of my New York book. Someday, maybe I'll collect all the pamphlets into one big novel. Because it really is kind of a novel. It reads almost like a novel. That's part of the intention, I would say. I'm going to try and lay down here. Forgive me for being... trying to rest my back and shit. How long am I going to do this? Only 37 minutes. Maybe I'll do like a speed round. I guess I am taking forever to do this. But the books are maybe like a little bit more substantial, like narrative. They're like novellas, I suppose. They're short novels. Like this is like Tonio Kroger or Death in Venice, you know, Alice in the Cities. It tells you about the places, the landscapes, Big Sur. It's my Big Sur piece. Although I've been to Big Sur, I've been lucky to be there a number of times. So it weaves through my writing and my videos in an interesting way. You know, I went to there in 2015 with Jack. It shows up in the... Okay, so I'll get into this now. Well, actually, this is actually a year fucking later. So then, okay, after that, I don't have the chat books from in between, or maybe I just didn't make any. I don't know why. I guess I was working on this. So this is summer 2018 and Thanksgiving 2018. And then the next thing, I suppose, I had chat books, I just didn't reprint them. Drop City and the Bicycle Day and all the shit I mentioned. Procrastination Innings. But then the next like book would be this Paris book. I guess I've talked about these books. Once again, it's just a continuation, going to Paris, relationship stuff. There's a lot of these books are like the cultural influences, you know, so like I was trying to imitate what I could with the poets that I was reading there, but it's harder to imitate that stuff. A lot of people in Europe are doing classical forms. They do rhyme and they do quatrains and shit, was kind of surprising. I didn't really have any interest in that. I was more trying to figure out what the avant-garde was there. I couldn't really find it, I guess. But Apollinaire, and Baudelaire and Rimbaud and the American writers that I knew who lived there, Gertrude Stein, Ashbery, and then, funnily enough, Eileen Myles was who I was imitating in this book and kind of trying to. But once again, it's a Douanel piece. It's very influenced by the 400 Blows and that aspect of Truffaut's work, that it's an autobiography sort of over his life. And so going to Paris, seeing Truffaut's grave, the book is sort of a movie. And these books there are videos on YouTube. You can watch Alice in the Cities, you can watch Placid Western, you can watch Left Coast, you can watch Romana Clay, the movie, on YouTube. And you can read the book and watch the movie and see what the hell I was talking about. At some point, I guess when I get some kind of money or stability in my life, I'll go into and I will probably add the poems over the videos. I'll add like recitation of the poem over the video to make it more like the videos I'm making now, which are like these sort of podcast long poems that you can just listen to. But, I want people to read the books, for Christ's sake. They're easy to read. And the way it looks on the page is important. It's a video in and of itself, in addition to the actual video. So then we took a trip to the West Coast, to San Francisco, Big Sur, Joshua Tree, LA, and we were living in Ridgewood. So that's what this book is about, Image Garden. So you see, this was the height of kind of like the intensity of the Trump era, 2019 summer. California's on fire, everything's stressful, everything's politically charged. So it's political, but like this was like my attempt to make like a modern contemporary like nature poem. And there's sort of the centerpiece of it is this piece, Chill Out, I'm Meditating, which is a center justified. And it's like a Michael McClure. I do think Michael McClure is sort of like the Wordsworth of today. And all his stuff is center justified. And I think there's something very futuristic about that. The fact that it's not left justified, it's not right justified, it's center justified. That feels symmetrical, and it doesn't, like half the people in the world read right to left. Half the people in the world read left to right. Some people read up and down, So it's like, I think center justified is a way to kind of be more futuristic, where it's like, it's neither one nor the other. It's balanced. Our bodies are kind of center justified, It's almost like an ink blot or something. But it's, these books were relatively short. This book's only like 20 pages or something, It was only later that I really got into. And so a lot of these, it being nature poem and sort of spots of time, there's a lot of like haiku type stuff. And the second half of the book is like living in Ridgewood, and sort of about that time, going to Poetry Project. There's political commentary in it, but it's more kind of funny. And it's not like, this one is not like directly political. It's like it's political in sort of like an inferential way. You can read this and do certain things about lifestyle or about what I'm focusing on and be like, okay, but I mean, these initial chapbooks, I put them together very quick. They're excerpts from my journals, and I was learning how to do it as I went. So this being an image garden, it is almost like being in a gallery or something. There's like these little vignettes of image that you go from. In my earlier stuff, that was one of the things reading these older chapbooks that I kind of struck me as like, I don't have a lot of longer, sustained monologue type pieces. They're all these little, I think with my relationship, I didn't really have time to sit and just blah, 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 blah. I wasn't writing with duration as much. Like something would happen and like it would turn into a phrase and I'd write it down in like a little haiku, little pool of stanza. And then, you know, I'd just be hanging out with my ex, and then whatever the next thing would be, you know, an hour later, write that down. It wasn't like I'm writing the whole time. I didn't really have time for that very often. And so it's like, it's more like these little lily pads of like perception. You go from this one to this one to this one, or little moments, you know. Whereas this taking it to the street, so this actually, I think this is one of the most important pamphlets I ever did. This was, I wrote this, I wrote a lot of these poems, all these protest poems I wrote real fast one night, September 30th, 2019. So these, a lot of times with the chapbooks, they come out two at a time. There will be sort of like, well, these are exactly the same, but like Image Garden and Taking It to the Streets are really like twins. Or they're like brothers or something. They're siblings. They're twins, but they're not identical twins. They're fraternal, maybe. They come out at the same time, and so they're like Image Garden is political, but it's more sort of a domestic. It's funny. There's cultural commentary. There's political. It's more like scenes from life, whereas this is like I wanted to write explicitly like a political. Here's like just I'm talking about. Here's what you need to do, like directly. And it was very influenced by Revolutionary Letters, because Revolutionary Letters is all of these like it's a sequence, just like the sonnets or whatever, where it's like there's kind of this form that she knows how to write a revolutionary letter. You know, it's like, okay, I'm gonna write another, or this is another revolutionary letter. Like there are hallmarks of it that make it part of the pattern or the sequence. And so this book is very well constructed too. The first half of it is all political, these protest poems, and then there's this poem side 2, and then it goes more into kind of like language poetry and kind of like hardcore surrealism and my Richard Hell poem and that kind of stuff. It's more like a Rimbaud piece in the second half, which is also political. It's also political. It is this kind of twisted syntax and imagery and this and that. And it's New York. It's very New York. The Image Garden book is more like California and Joshua trees in it and Big Sur and, you know, the fucking redwood trees and all that kind of stuff. Whereas this is more like taking it to the streets. This is about this, like I said, this is my Thomas Bernie, right? When we were driving back from California, we're listening to the Democratic debates, and Sarah was so obsessed with Bernie, and Bernie was great. And so we were listening to Bernie constantly, and like, this is like the Democratic Socialist, like, here's my radical political pamphlet. So, in addition to being just like a poetry pamphlet, this was meant to be like, I can hand this out in like political, you can read it like a Thomas Paine. It's almost like Common Sense or whatever kind of, it's samizdat. It is meant to be like a manifesto of sorts, but it's written through these poems, which I call them protest poems, and I remember writing them in my journal, 1 page per protest poem, protest song, protest anthem number 7, protest, taking it to the streets, political poem number 2, protest anthem 8, protest poem 9, infinite protest till the planet is healed. So I have all these protests, you know. And I don't mention Trump. One of my best pieces, 100 Things You Can Do Right Now, is in this. And it's a lot like, it's very influenced by those Thule Kupferberg, whatever, like 100,001. You know, he used to have those list poems, whatever they were. I read those in college. They're in the Beat Reader. So this is 100 Things You Can Do Right Now. I think with the political stuff, you know, part of it was being a white guy in this era. It was like, how do I do this in a way? You know, you have to write about politics. How can I do it in a way that's not appropriative, that's authentic to who I am, but is also new, innovative, and is like hitting and saying everything that I feel like isn't being said, or like, here's my codification of belief or whatever, but through poetry. You know, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. I do think, you know, the Declaration of Independence is like poetry. Um, when in the course of human, you know, we the people, the language of it, the part of the reason why, as a kid anyway, I liked Thomas Jefferson as a president was because of he was a good writer. He was a poet, in a certain way. I think he was good at a lot of shit. Like all those early pot smoking founding fathers, they just kind of, you know, they built their own houses and they designed their own beds and shit. You know, we know he fucking is a piece of shit, but like, you know, um, I think there is a political aspect, oratory, speech making. That's like one of the few places that like poetics, that vibe. I mean, it's sort of a poetry reading in a way. You know, is that all the president do? Go around and meet people, make speeches? Like that's what I do. Meet poets. So, 100 things you can do right now. The bullet pointing was important. The political propaganda aspect of it, I think, enables you to write in this way. 100 things you can do right now. Don't go to work. 1, don't go to work. 2, quit your day job. 3, take it to the streets. 4, unionize. 5, blow the whistle. 6, meditate. 7, do Tai Chi. 8, write poetry. 9, make a list of favorite movies. 10, make a list of favorite songs. On and on and on. I mean, I know that shit doesn't sound that political, but that's part of the lifestyle is part of the politics. You know, that's a big part of my work. The fact that my work is no budget, you know, and printed down these pamphlets, like I said, I got the printer, cost $90 from Walmart. It's a laser printer. It prints both sides. The ink was $10 from some website I got scammed on. The paper was $6 on sale from Best Buy. I did upgrade and get the nice paper. I actually like the cheaper paper better. This stuff's harder to fold, but it is printed on nice quality paper, according to Epson. So anyway, taking it to the streets, I think, has aged well. And I think that's why collecting all of these pamphlets is, I think, interesting. They all are different. They all touch different sides of things. No two of them are really the same. Then there's a few I didn't reprint, Posterity Zoo and whatever the fucking other one is, something City. I don't know. I just have. There's so many of these already. Maybe I should have printed one of each, but then so the next one I renamed Beach Trees. It always should have been called Kinhancha Consapung, but it's hard to fit it on the cover, to be honest. So this was, well, I guess the next book in the sequence would actually be the LA Story book, which I've talked about at length. I won't go into, but it's probably like emotionally and like, I mean, it's the longest. It's almost 200 pages. So I think this is my like novel. You know, if the New York Times was going to review anything, it would probably be this book, I would say, because it's just, I think it's the most emotionally affecting. I think it really does, particularly if you watch the movie with it. But I think even reading the book, it's kind of sad. And then, so literally, these books are back to back. LA Story goes right into Selective Amnesia. Like, literally, this is March 9th. It ends on March 9th. This starts on March 10th, 2020. So, you know, like I said, this covers fall 2019. And then this is beginning of 2020. And it's hard to believe how much the world changed. I mean, at this point, I was still living in fucking Ridgewood. And then in this book, I was in LA. Sarah's breaking up with me. And then in this book, I'm back in Columbus, and there's a fucking pandemic. You know, that's in 6 months. Shit changed a lot. And Joe Biden is the nominee. You know, we went from Bernie world to Biden is the nominee. Like that. But Trump is the president through all of this shit. You know? So, LA Story is probably... You know, honestly, I'm trying to sell these books. because I never really had a proper launch for any of my fucking books. And so even though this book has been out since 2019, beginning of 2019, no one even has it because I just didn't really distribute it. Like, literally nobody's even read this fucking book. It's been out for 3 years, almost 4. Same with all this shit. I mean, LA Story, I published this last summer. I never did a book launch. So I'm not actually sold that many of these. Nobody even has it. So part of what I want to do with this festival this weekend and with the featured reading on Monday is I want to use it sort of as a book launch and sell as many of these fucking books as I can. And the idea is, like, if you read one of them, you want to read all of them. Because they're a trilogy, just like the fucking Hobbit. Just like Lord of the Rings. Same shit. It should be sold like as a box set, really. Like all 4 of these should come in like a box. Like fucking the Lord of the Rings, you know. Or Peter Rabbit. I had this Peter Rabbit book set as a kid from BP. Big Polluters. So yeah, LA Story. So these are $10 a piece. I guess, you know, maybe you could get all 4 of them for like 30 or something. Maybe I could do a deal like that. And then you read them all the way through, and they really kind of tell the whole story. The pamphlets kind of fill in the cracks, but this more or less gives you the broad strokes of what was going on. You know, the relationship, and then boom, I'm on my ass living with my mom. And so this book is kind of interesting in of itself because it's a pandemic book. Selective Amnesia. It's my white noise. It's my airborne toxic event. And so it's really, I mean, this and the 4 chapbooks that I made, you know, during the pandemic year, High on Life, Mutual Fair, they're really all one fucking book in a way. Like, you could collect Selective Amnesia, because it's all 1 year, and it's really the pandemic year. You could put Selective Amnesia, Kanhancha Konsapong, High on Life, and Mutual Fair all into one book, and it's like, that would be the Columbus pandemic book. But Selective Amnesia is kind of an interesting thing in of itself. I think it's important that it's like a perfect bound. It's the early days of the pandemic when it was just really weird. When, you know, nature was healing, the birds were singing, and then Kanhancha Konsapong is summer 2020. So this is deep in that vibe. This is sort of like going from civilization to just like this weird Men in Black wipe of the lockdown and everything, deep into nature, walking around Clintonville, Ohio with deer and birds and trees and just trying to absorb that as much as possible. Being Columbus, everything was shut down. It's like, what else could you do but like walk around and look at stuff, meditate, you know, write about it. That's what I did. So this, you know, once again, they're all kind of like the Prelude or Grasmere Journals. They're a long nature poem, really. But it weaves in and out of thought, and maybe I should print some of those other books just to have them. I feel like I should have one of every book. I'll probably wrap this. I'm getting near the end. So anyway, Kanhancha Konsapong is the name of the Olentangy River in the indigenous language. And so this book, that's really what it is. It's just like being on that riverbank in the trees. And that's sort of where I was. I mean, I was out of my relationship. I was getting money from the government. I couldn't see anybody because I'm so paranoid about coronavirus. Living with my mom. Walking on the Kanhancha Konsapong River every day. Going up the ravines and shit. You know, after my relationship, it just felt like I wanted to be as alone as I could possibly be, even though I lived with my mom and that was a whole thing. So this is a document of the time. It's about Columbus, really. There's a lot of good Columbus writing in here about the city. This piece, Daily Routine, is really good. But once again, it's just these little spots of writing. I wasn't really writing long. Or, you know, I didn't really transcribe that stuff. Everything I was writing, like, came to me, and then I wrote it down. They're just little spots of thinking. It's not like a long... So you're getting, here's a moment, here's a moment, here's a moment. That's just how it felt. It felt like I don't want to push. I don't want to work. You know, work is all canceled. This is the first time in our lives, sort of. So this is, it's sort of like a trying to live as, you know, free and close to nature in a certain way, and everything's shut down, and the weird kind of like levels of that. It's an but this was also right before my ex got together with her dude and like her fucking music and shit. So this was sort of like a peacefully, blissfully ignorant time. I'm just sort of walking around Columbus in summer. It's a summer book. This is really a hot summer book. It's outdoors. The sun is hot in it, and like, I'm just sort of blissfully unaware. I wasn't having that bad of a time, considering, you know, we're in a fucking pandemic. I mean, it wasn't great, but like, you know, I didn't really care that we were broken up or anything. It sucked having to go through that, but when she got together with a guy, that's what this book is about, High on Life. So this book is actually, once again, this one is interesting. It's kind of an interesting standalone piece, because all the poems are these kind of, I was writing in this notebook, one poem per page, and so every poem in this book is kind of, particularly these ones at the end, are kind of like one-page poems, and the whole book, you know, whereas this book is these little kind of spots of like short piece, and this is kind of a longer piece, and this is like a short piece, and this is a short piece. This one is like more like I wrote a page, and so I was writing a little bit more, and so I think just stylistically, formally, this is my longest book. It's 44 pages. It's my longest chapbook, and it plays similar. It's sort of an interesting kind of afterburn of the LA Storybook and the Relationship Trilogy, because, I mean, a lot of it is about the Midwest or Columbus or whatever, but what you see happen in this book is me discover my ex getting with this new guy, and, you know, the heartbreak of that. And then, so you live through that in this book. You know, this book is really the record of that. In the autumn of 2020, when Trump got COVID. And so what happened was, when she got together with her new guy, that's when she really was like, we got to deal with this fucking storage unit and shit. And so I got a rental car, I drove to New York, met up with her, we went to the storage unit, blah, blah, blah. And that trip was just really interesting. I went upstate, I went to Sparrow House, I stayed up there, hung out with Peters and Snake, and then I went to Woodstock, I went to Big Pink, you know, I went all through that area. And it was my first time really upstate. I drove home through upstate, it was gorgeous. And even though it was like this sad, it was like a honeymoon in reverse. That's what this book is about. It's a honeymoon in reverse, because it was like we were together and like there was still something there, but like she was there, you know, talking to her dude and, you know, really focused on her career. She had really moved on. You know, you could just tell she had moved on. And I'm driving us around in this rental car, you know, so it was just kind of a weird, but like bittersweet. It was kind of a bittersweet time. It's fall. That time of year is bittersweet, like now. You know, it's just a bittersweet time where it's like, it's been warm and it's this mixture of hot and cold, you know. It's still summer, but like the wind is cold. And so like there's like this heat and like this love and like this exciting. I'm in New York. That was exciting. I'd been in Columbus the whole fucking year. Seeing New York during the pandemic, you know, was really interesting. I wish I would have been here for it, to be honest. I know that sounds insane, but so that whole trip through upstate is in this book. And the whole, just the singleness of it and the separation, the legal it's like getting a divorce, you know. This book is like getting a divorce. And the logistics of that. And there's all this great David Lee Roth. This is when I was listening to tons of Van Halen. When I was driving home from New York, they were playing all of this fucking Van Halen. Because I was just listening to the radio. My fucking phone or whatever wouldn't work. I didn't have internet phone at that time. And so I'm just listening to the radio, and all they fucking play is Van Halen. And it was October 4th, October 3rd was when I was writing this shit. When I drove back, I forget when the trip was exactly. It was sometime in September, October 2020. So it was right around this time of year. Coming to New York at the height of the pandemic, you know. And seeing it firsthand and the danger of that, but the beauty of it, going upstate and going to Unnameable. I got all these books, you know, because I had money. I could afford to buy myself food and not worry about gas and this and that. So it was really a beautiful time, you know. It was a beautiful trip. It was peaceful. Even though it was during this kind of like, you know, hard thing emotionally. And so as I'm driving back through upstate in Pennsylvania, Erie, Pennsylvania, I came back through Cleveland in 71. All they fucking play is Running with the Devil and Unchained and every fucking Van Halen song. I mean, they're just the most kick-ass classic rock shit. And so I got really into Van Halen after that. I don't know why, but then he died. He died like literally the day after I wrote this. This poem was published in Ariadne. This was my piece in Ariadne, October 4th. And it's all about Van Halen. I wrote it the day before he died. So from that point, I felt weirdly connected to Van Halen. And honestly, that music really helped me. The attitude of that music, the kind of like buoyant, it's like macho, but like, to be honest, like you gotta respect those dudes. Like they're really amazing at what they do. Eddie Van Halen is a fucking genius. And it allowed me to get into Roth. So I started watching all the Roth show on YouTube, which is phenomenal. Highly recommended, the Roth show. And a lot of these poems, I was like transcribing shit from the Roth show or influenced shit from the Roth show. My piece about kayaking in Bay Ridge is from the Roth show. But it's weird because a lot of this stuff that was layered in these books came true. You know, at this point, I didn't know I was going to live here. I didn't know I was going to be doing this or going to Bay Ridge for practice or this or that. And this was right around the time I was starting to talk or negotiate about this apartment. And so it's interesting how your writing can be like a premonition of the future. And so this book, I don't know, it's special for me in a way. Even though it's kind of a stylistically, I think it's interesting. I actually think there's a lot of good writing in this. There's a lot of good poems in this. Like, this is one of my most substantial. This is like a real book almost. It's hard to believe that, I mean, I guess it's obnoxious to write this much shit about this much stuff, but I should take a brief interlude to talk about this chapbook. This is my Pete's Candy Store chapbook, these poems were actually all written in like 2012, 2014, and they're not really autobiographical. So this chapbook is sort of out of sequence in a way, but it's got a lot of like my most effective poetry in it. Even though it's like insanely sexual and like I could easily be canceled if this book gets in the wrong hands. It's got a lot of my best writing in it. And so I printed this for my Valentine's Day show this year at Pete's Candy Store. Because that show was just meant to be, that's why this cover and shit, because that was the flyer. But I actually have not printed that many copies of this. But I've gotten such good response to it that I felt like I needed to print more. Because people like this chapbook a lot. So I am going to bring some of these. They're X-rated. I typically don't distribute them in this country, but it's kind of like provocatively obscene. But anyway, I put this book together in 2022. Even though the writing's from 2012, this is like a little bit more of traditional poems because they all have like titles. There's no calendar. There's no. It's autobiographical, but it's not chronological or part of like this ongoing reality show. So this is Too Hot. Get your hands on it if you can. This is City Life. So this is returning to New York in the spring of 2020. Honestly, this is one of my best I know I say that probably about a lot of them, but like stylistically, this is really interesting. It's got a lot of the oral novel piece. I think is really one of my best pieces, and touches on a certain kind of writing that I never really published before that much. And then I think it's, the Chelsea Girls poem is good. All the New York stuff. Like, if you want a New York book, this is it. This is the one you have to have. This is like my best New York. The Cafe Life poem, I really think it's close to my heart. And there's just a lot of, this is probably one of my favorite of my chapters. I mean, the art alone, I think. And, as featured on Don Yorty blog. But, that was honestly like the most beautiful time of my life. Spring 2021. Coming back to the city, being here, getting the vaccine. It was really an amazing time. This was the book I put together for the KGB bar reading. So I put this together at the beginning of June 2020, and it's what I read from Don Yorty blog, my first time in the parish hall. And I just think, New Yorkers should have this book. So I printed out a good number of copies. And then, I actually didn't really put together, I need to put together some chapbooks from last year, from like summer to winter. But that's when I was working on the LA Story and the Selective Amnesia book. I put these together last summer, sort of with my hiatus time. And then I went into the woods and did all my readings outdoors and shit, which was sort of a publishing. That was meant to be sort of an unadulterated theatrical, just like publishing it into the air and letting it go. But I will type those up. I'm going to put together a New York book at some point. There will be a New York Diaries that's all of the stuff together in one book. That's like, this is the New York book. Honestly, there's a lot of stuff that I could type up from 2018 and 2017 that would fit. But anyway, so once again, these books are sort of twins. Single Room Occupancy and the Kerouac Tribute, the System Lord Kerouac book. I put these together February, March, this year, 2022. And this is all about Manhattan. So as your experience changes, like my experience of New York at this point in City Life, this book is really about the West Village. It's all about falling in love with that. Once again, it's a location study. It's about the psychogeography, the poets of that place, the artistic history. This was my place to really dig in to the psychogeography of the west side of Manhattan in particular. And so that's really what this book is about. It's about that kind of modernist bohemia from 100 years ago. Hart Crane and E.E. Cummings and all of that shit. Joe Gould and all that. Whereas this, having lived and walked around and been here, and especially this winter, just like when the Omicron hit, it became this weird, like, hermit. It felt like the 70s again, in a weird way. Like, I didn't really see anybody for most of December, January, February, and then, so that's really what this was about. Single room occupancy, solitude in Manhattan. And this book, having lived in the landscape, it's really about Midtown and those hotels and that kind of lifestyle, living alone in an apartment in Manhattan, if you're lucky enough to do that, or in a rooming house, and just that experience, walking up to Jack's, dollar store, walking to fucking Koreatown, walking to Times Square, walking to Central Park, seeing all those old hotels, seeing all those old buildings, the single room occupancy, and just the way I was living in the kind of quarantine and the solitude of this apartment, and just like So this is all what that was like. It's what the building. This is more. These books honestly are a little bit more. I lived in New York a little longer. I lived in Manhattan a little longer, so I've absorbed the landscape a little bit more. And so the poems in these books kind of reflect the landscape, and they're more. Whereas City Life, I was still in this kind of like writing little moments down as they happen. These books really are more like, okay, now I'm actually like writing again. I'm writing buildings. I'm writing Midtown. I'm writing these 40-foot tall stacks of windows. I'm writing, and so these poems, they're longer, they're bigger. They're like the city. They're bigger. They're like the bridges. They span from, I wrote a lot of them on the train to band practice in Bay Ridge. So that sense of like spanning New York, spanning from Manhattan to Bay Ridge, and these, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, the Verrazano Bridge, the 59th Street. It just gives you, even though in Brooklyn you get a sense of the scale of Manhattan, scale of New York, living in Manhattan really gives you that kind of Gershwin, gargantuan, like the giant magnates, it gives you that kind of like hulking vibe in a way. Seeing down the East River from the Upper East Side, seeing, walking amongst Midtown, and just like these stacks and stacks of giants just like walking at you, single file. It's a whole other sense of scale. And so these books are a little bit more of an organic, and there's also kind of an agenda a little bit. I'm trying to put an identity forth about, I don't know, it's my Kerouac tribute. It's my, there's Berrigan stuff in here. It's about bars and West 4th Street. It's more about that kind of like dive bar energy, kind of reclaiming that, and certain kind of masculinity in a way, the Whitman-esque kind of saunterer in the dive bar, but doing the best version of that you can, and its legacy in this place, to be honest. On West 4th Street, in the West Village, on the Bowery, on the West Side, in Chelsea, they wrote On the Road a block from here. They wrote, so it's, Bill Kushner lived a block from here. Schuyler lived a couple blocks from here. Bob Dylan, Chelsea Hotel, Ashbury, Wallace Stevens. Trying to get all those influences in, So once again, these books, a lot of times I'll give them to people as a set, because it's almost like one book. They occurred real close to each other, and you can kind of read them all. And then Bloomsday, which is the most recent. And so this is my experiment with trying to write a New York novel. All of these books, could make one book. City Life, Single Room Occupancy, the Kerouac book, into Bloomsday. This is like moving into stand-up comedy space, moving into podcast space. I'm learning to publish by reading, publish by recording. And so this is like bridging that space between audiobook, podcast, and writing. And so it's a little bit looser. It's a little bit more run-on. And it's more New York stuff. Once again, the style, the poems, it's a little bit different than, each of these books are just like, they're a little bit stylistically, even though they're tall, kind of like stacked poems, these ones are a little bit more, there's variation with the line lengths in some degree. I don't know. The poems in this book are like wider, I think. Well, no, the poems in this one are the first couple are very wide, and then the last one is very skinny, like West 4th Street. Whereas the poems in Single Room Occupancy are like a little bit more. You can see me getting into writing long pieces again and writing sustained. But it's sort of like going from a calendar book into like a sit down writing book. I think as I've returned to doing readings, I need material to do at readings. So, like this Bloomsday book, and I'm also just reading my diaries out loud. I'll read from my diary a lot of the open mics I go to. Like last night, I read from my journal. So, these books are constructed a little bit more self-consciously to be able to be read at open mics. You know, it's like I have a number of pieces in here that are like 2 minutes long, 4 minutes long, 5 minutes long. So I can put a few of those together and make a feature. I find that at readings, it's nicer to kind of like, you don't want to read like maybe a super long poem per se, but if you can stay in a poem for 3 or 4 minutes, it's kind of nice to just, you can kind of shift. A lot of times when I start a poem, I'm like revving higher in a lower gear, and as I'm able to read longer, I'll get into a higher gear. I can rev lower. I can kind of chill into it. So like Bloomsday is a lot of pieces that are like 4 or 5 minute long pieces, rather than a book that's a bunch of little haiku. It's harder to read that stuff. It's harder to read because the audience is like, do we clap? Do we not clap? Was that, you know? So yeah, those are the books that I will have. That's, it's not a complete run of everything, but as you can see, there are people, well, one of the things at the readings is people commonly, you know, because I usually take like an assortment. I'll usually take 2 or 3 different chapbooks to give away or sell. It's a suggested donation of $5. Usually people will pay it. It's not that much. And for what it is, you know, it's not bad, you know. This book in particular, 1 year, this is a good book. But people are always asking, like, which one should I buy? And so that's a little bit of, it's almost like weed strains. It's kind of what you're into, but, you know, the 1 year book is a really good standalone book. The City Life book, really good standalone book. The High on Life books, really good standalone book. The Relationship Trilogy, I think, is a very rewarding reading experience. And I think the poets who read these books do take away, like, things to use. I think a lot of what inspires me and what I value in poetry are poets who give permission, who do something that maybe you've never seen before, and they make it work. And they're always, like Burnett Mayer gives so much permission. She's always going in new directions. Every book is kind of a concept in a way. Her calendar pieces, her book Works and Days, her Poetry State Forest, both of those books were hugely influential to me. I found them in the Brooklyn Public Library, really before I knew what a lot of the other second, third generation New York School was. I'd say I probably got into Burnett Mayer around the same time, if not earlier, than Eileen Myles. But just like giving permission, you know, if you can, even publishing the damn books and showing people, like, I'm writing a series that's like about my life, and like, you can do this. There's a little bit, you know, I think with poets, there's this sense of like, you have to collect the absolute best stuff, and like, you know, I agree with that. Maybe I'm just trying to get away with, like I say, I publish everything I write. At this point, on my TV show, I read almost everything on my TV show that I write down, which is kind of insane for a writer to do that. The idea is you're supposed to revise, and I'm not saying that that's good or it's for everybody, but I think there is some value. Going to the Natural History Museum, they have these huge fucking, I think they're like Mayan, or I'm not sure, but they're these huge like wheels. They're like these stone fucking wheels that are carved
And I think they tell a story or something, but there's all these panels and there's all these ornate kind of designs and it's symmetrical and it's this and that. And it takes the artist their whole fucking life to make this thing, this big ass wheel. And their whole life's work is this goddamn wheel. And in a certain way, I think it's the story of their life, this wheel. And I remember going to the Natural History Museum and being super inspired by that. The idea that one's entire life was sort of devoted to this one piece. And so, in a certain way, even though there are all these individual chapbooks and they're sort of like dots in a trail, I think they are also meant to be little tiles in the mosaic of this huge structure. You know, the idea, you know, even though I've only been publishing these books for 5 years, if you start reading from the October book and some of those other chapbooks I put together, what was the one I put together for Olivia? There was one. Some of my chapbooks are in my my self-included book, but the point is it makes one long poem, right? All the chapbooks in the life. I'm taking moments from my life. I'm I'm chiseling them out like a little diamonds, little sequins, little studs, and I'm putting them like strand in a strand. You know, it's like you're stringing them together like they're pearls. That's what Nicholas Ray said. He said every scene is like a little pearl. If you make every scene good, you put them together, it makes a necklace. You know, that's the way I kind of look at these little stanzas. These every line, every syllable, every word is a little detail, a little thing that you get exactly perfect. And so you can read, boom, through the cycle and you can watch the show. And I'm going to have DVDs. I didn't even show my fucking DVDs. I fucking burned some DVDs for the poetry festival. So there will be scenes from a life available on DVD in addition to the chapbooks. I think having tangible physical shit makes such a bigger impact, actually, especially as an artist. I think putting your stuff on the internet, people might like it and this and that, but I know a lot of my shit, I just feel like nobody even looks at it. I feel like a lot of my shit, when I post it online, it goes in one ear and out the other. And that's not a good feeling. And it's sort of a huge awakening to me I've been, because I hand out my chapbooks at the readings. I just want people to have my poetry. That's why I make them, to be honest. I just want people to have my poetry. The idea that like people have my books and they're reading them, what could be better than that? And so going to the open mics and meeting people firsthand and giving it to them, it's special to like, you know, everybody I give a book to, I really respect, and I want them to like get whatever they can from what I'm doing. I want them to steal whatever the fuck they can. And if they can get anything from it, if they will even read it, that is like what could be better than that? Like the fact that smart fucking good poets that I respect, good artists, good people are like checking out my fucking work and like even looking at it is like already amazing to me. So the fact that you can, to me, it's just an instance of showing that like we make the world. I think in our culture we're taught to be passive and we're just taught to be viewers and to be critics and to assess things, and you have to win some contest, or you got to get published by some big thing or else it's not real. And they just tell you that because they don't want you to take any agency. They don't want you to think that you can do anything. They want you to be passive. They want you to be a worker. But when you make a book, it's suddenly there's an object. Suddenly there's this fucking thing that's like, I'm real in a way. You know, like this exists. You know, the energy of this carries through the world in a way that you have no idea even how. And it's nice to be able to do shit on the internet. You know, I'm not against that. I think it's a two-pronged attack, but for whatever reason, I feel like I have more success IRL. Not that there's a fucking difference, but like, it was a shock to me when I gave people my books. They came back and they said they loved them. I've had multiple people that I really respect in the past month or two. Annabelle Lee, when I ran into her on the street, I loved your chat. She said she loved my chapbooks. You know what that means? She knows what the fuck she's talking about. Like, that doesn't happen on the internet. I mean, people aren't on my YouTube videos going, oh my God, I love this. The people I know just aren't those kind of people. They don't watch YouTube. They don't comment that much. They have lives. Whereas a book, I don't know. It gives you a presence and it legitimizes what you're doing. It's the authority of the medium, once again. And I think writers should take that into their own hands. It's a great way to get feedback and to grow, I think. You know, if I would have submitted this shit to any publisher, there's no way they would have published it. But the fact that it exists causes people to have to take notice. They have to go, what is this? This is interesting. Why isn't this book at fucking Barnes & Noble? You know, why can't I walk into fucking, why can't I walk into, I mean, are there even any other Borders? Why can't I walk into, Walden Books? Someday when I'm on the MTV, literary imprint, my books are available in media play across the world. Those were the days. I just want my book to be sold in media play. Is that so? Is that impossible? Not to compare myself to the Mayan wheel makers. You know, they're incredible. But I like the idea of having... So here it is. I made it all by hand. That's part of the politics of it. Doing it for very low cost, distributing it person to person, firsthand, and making it yourself. What could be more ethical? It's all me. It's all my thoughts. No budget. You don't need corporate sponsors. You don't need grant money. You don't even need a job. I mean, well, you do need... You do need the big fat ass COVID fellowship. I mean, this is what we were supposed to do with that energy. They gave all of this energy. Hey, we only got 20 grand. Puff Daddy got $1 million. All these rich motherfuckers got millions of dollars. We got shit. So, turning that into this, having that extra resource, you know, to give that ability, it would be a lot harder, I think, to get people to notice what I'm doing without these pamphlets, you know. Every open mic I go to, I try to make an announcement. I got pamphlets. I gave them away in fucking France. All these people in Paris, France, coming up to me after the reading. They want my pamphlets. You know how exciting that is as an author? To have people clamoring to get your pamphlets? Not that they're clamoring. I'm not saying they're clamoring. But it's a nice feeling, you know. Bands have merch. So I've got some CDs. I got some DVDs. I got the chapbooks, I got the hard books. Maybe I'll take some tapes, who knows. I'm going to be selling books from Vehicle Editions. Annabelle Lee has generously provided some of her classic literature for us to sell at the table, which is going to boost our profile immensely. It's not just going to be my bullshit. I mean... Now that I've been putting these books together for whatever, I mean, it took me the whole day to put together about 40 books.
if I had, so my model for doing this, right, is like Mimeo. This is the closest thing. All the second generation New York School and all the poets of the Poetry Project. One of the reason why I'm so, um, you know, admiring of that place is the way that they published in the 60s and 70s when they first started was very similar to this. They had a Mimeo machine, which was some kind of like your average school or church would have this to make newsletters and shit. And so, you know, you typeset and they would print their magazine, The World, or they'd print their books from this fucking Mimeo machine firsthand, and they'd have what they'd call collating parties, which is they'd have all their poet friends over to the church or their apartment or whatever on a Friday night. They'd get some beer, they'd get some whatever, they'd have a good time, they'd play some tunes, and everybody would fold the books and staple them. All the poets would take, you know, they'd all take turns putting, and so, you know, if you had 8 people putting together books, you could put together, you know, this many books in 1/8 of the time. This took me, I'd say, 4 or 5 hours to put together 40 books. So if you had 8 people doing it, you could do it in half an hour. You know, you could produce 100 books maybe in an evening or something. So that's something I may try to organize. Well, what I was going to say is now that I've established this, you know, I've been kind of like, it's been hard to put together the second issue of Easy Paradise because I've been trying to collect all this work, and it's just like, I hate emailing. I just hate it. I cannot do email. I'm a drug addict. I can't do email. It's impossible for me to write emails. It takes me forever to even write like a 3-line email. And so, you know, putting together a literary magazine, particularly during the pandemic, it's like everything was email. So it hasn't been that easy. I've got some really great stuff, but I really only have about 5 poets or something. So I'm like, I think I'm just going to do the next Easy Paradise like this. The first one was a perfect bound book, just like this, which, to be honest, it's just too expensive now. Like, this book, when I first published this from Lulu.com, individual unit cost on this was like $1.50 or something. Like, literally, I got 40 of these books or something. I don't even remember. It was not that expensive, though. Whereas, like, the unit cost of this now is like $3 or $4 because of the ink, the paper, all of it, because of inflation and shit. So, if I can just print out a 40-page chapbook that will be Easy Paradise number 2 and do, let's say, I could do 50 copies of that myself. It wouldn't be fun, but I could do it. I feel bad because these poets gave me poems like literally like 2 years ago, and I haven't been able to process them yet because I was expecting to just like get a lot more work, and I don't know. To be honest, like, I'm not trying to like hog it and work on my own shit totally, but like, I do video of other poets now, like at the Poetry Project. I'm going tonight in a little while to film. That's how I publish. That's how I look at doing editing. And that's like my literary it's basically the same thing. Except rather than like publishing a book, I do a video of all these poets and it goes on YouTube or whatever. So it's like, that's sort of where that time and energy went. And to be honest, it's just like, I'm kind of boosting the signal. That's the point of doing a literary magazine. Is you're kind of like, you're boosting other people's signal. It's something that self-publishing is a little bit selfish. I mean, obviously, it's kind of in the name. But it's, I don't think it's bad. The reaction that I've gotten from people is like, it's just good that the books exist, you know? And so I like doing it. I think I've always been a bibliophile, and always, my obsession is books, and so to be actively somebody who's able to make them, I think that's a role that everybody should try to step into. Whatever their hobby is, I think it's good to try to be active rather than just like watching shit or being kind of, you know, there's a place for that too, but like making books, figuring out the kind of like
ins and outs of how it actually works and stuff has been really exciting. And you know, people should make movies. They should play music. They should publish their own books. It is kind of a mainstream media lie that like you have to be some kind of big shot author to be worth reading. Like, uh, it's a form of communication, really. This is almost like no different than sending somebody a letter or something. Um, it's about the same number of pages. In fact, I was mailing these to people during the pandemic. I was trying to just send them. You know, I sent my friend Steve a chapbook. I sent a bunch of people chapbooks during the. I just try to give them to whoever, you know, whoever I meet. If I think that they're cool and they might get something out of it, I see value in it. It, you know, it's just sort of like a calling card. I think as an author, plus, I mean, to be honest, the reason why I started fucking publishing the books was because I had a fucking stack of printer paper in my backpack that I took everywhere of 200 pages that was like all my poems that I would read from. And I was just like, why don't I just put this in a fucking book and like print it, and then I won't have to carry like 200 printer paper that's like getting all fucking mangled and shit in my backpack. Like, and also I went to Burroughs, and Burroughs has this great chapbook section, and they had this one publisher that literally just like printed stories on fucking. It was literally just folded over 3 times, and like they left it in the fucking store, and I think it was $1 or $2, and it was like, that's just paper. They didn't even like bind it or staple it or anything. It's literally just fucking paper that they folded over like it's a goddamn letter they're putting in an envelope. I was like, but it felt like, well, their writing's in a store and it's published. I mean, they called themselves a publisher, and why not? Is that illegitimate? And so, you know, to me, this is about as good as, I mean, I'm not really good for the people that make like really nice chapbooks with like string and like nice paper and shit. That's good. That's nice. But to me, it's also, it's a little bougie. You know, part of the point of this is it's meant to be utilitarian grade, almost like some kind of military issue. It's meant to be sort of nondescript aesthetically because the images that you're supposed to see are all in the text. You know, that's where the visual comes in for me. I don't want to provide some kind of super, but there still is an aesthetic going on, and you might be drawn to this purely because of that. You might say, oh, that's interesting, you know. It's kind of iconic. Maybe, I hope Vogue magazine, I would love to do a 73 questions with Vogue magazine in the apartment. That would be a good video. I need to get famous so I can do a Vogue 73 questions here. So anyway, that's my spiel. Come to the New York Poetry Festival this weekend. We'll be reading tomorrow. Annabelle Lee, Yvonne Bien, and myself, 11:30 a.m. at the Brinkley stage. I really should have booked somebody else. I feel bad, but I don't know. I hope they read 10 minutes each, because I will do 10 minutes. I'll feel fine about doing 10 minutes, but I don't want to do more than 10 minutes. That would feel kind of obnoxious. And then we'll be at the table with the books, with the DVDs, and then Monday night, same deal. I'll be at Shades of Green, Phoenix Reading Series. I'm featured. It's my first featured spot. I think I'll be reading from Bloomsday. I'm just going to rip it hard. 15 minutes of straight, frankly fabulous. Maybe I'll wear I think I'm going to wear a suit. Thank you for watching. You know, I can mail these books out, too. If people want to send me $5, if you want to Venmo me $5, at Shoyish. Don't Venmo request me. Do not Venmo request me. But if you send me $5, and your address, I can send you a book. So that's Rotcore International, published by Easy Paradise, is a subsidiary of Rotcore International. Come to the Poetry Festival, say hello, stop by the booth. We'll be there all weekend. I'll have the Bluetooth. I'll be listening to Jimmy Buffett, boat drinks. Be taking the ferry over. We're going to have a blast. It's going to be fun. All right, how do I